Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Medventions lecture series. I'm very delighted to be introducing our speaker today, Dr. Joseph Ferenbok, who will be talking about a very interesting topic, ideation and brainstorming in medtech. I just would like to make some very quick housekeeping announcements. Please note that our next lecture is scheduled to Thursday, October 26th. We're having Dr. Shahira Bimani, the director of Marzik site, and who will be lecturing on the medical devices reimbursement in Canada. Please note that the lecture will start at 7 o'clock and not 5 o'clock as usual. And we're sorry about the inconvenience for that. It was the speaker who requested this change. Also, please know that the Medventions Innovation Day has been rescheduled to Thursday, February 8th. 2018. So mark your calendars from now. We have started reaching out to speakers locally and globally, and we'll be announcing more details on the day very soon. So back to our workshop today, the ideation workshop. So throughout the past 6 weeks, we have been addressing the first stage of the medical technology innovation process, or the clinical needs finding process. We have looked on how to perform meaningful clinical observations, how innovators should understand or appreciate the regulatory environment, the business modeling in medtech, and the intellectual property management. This lecture actually marks the transition to the second stage in the medical technology innovation and commercialization process, the ideation and brainstorming phase, or the phase with all the creativity, where all the creativity comes up. So we're fortunate that Dr. Ferenbok is with us today and will be lecturing on the essentials of ideation, and will be telling us more about the brainstorming techniques and approaches that are typically utilized in the medtech field. A little bit of a background on our speaker. So Joseph is the founding director of the Professional Masters in Health Science and Translational Research. He's also the co-founder and co-director of the Health Innovation Hub at the Faculty of Medicine under the portfolio of the Vice Dean Research and Innovation. The Health Innovation Hub, or H2I, goal is to educate, enable, facilitate training, initiated commercialization of health matters. H2I is not like any other incubator or accelerator. It's an enabler that combines mentorship with researchers and clinicians and develops partnership opportunities with key opinion leaders. Joseph's academic and research interests center on understanding frameworks for translating discoveries into impact through the commercialization of products, protocols, policy, and education. His interests include engaging multidisciplinary stakeholders and collaborative teams, and teaching creativity and translational thinking as a framework for mobilizing knowledge into innovations. Thank you very much, Joseph, for being our guest speaker today.
I wonder whoever wrote that. That's great. Hi, everyone. So the way I want to start before we actually start is a little bit informally to poll you as to what you actually want to get out of this next hour. Because I have no pretenses in that brainstorming, creativity, ideas are not generally seen as hardcore skills in the sciences. They tend to be soft skills, much overlooked. At the same time, they are very important for problem solving and being able to understand where you can take things and how. So anyone want to shout out, what are your expectations? Well, I mean, those of you have to be here, you have to be here. But what do you want to do for the next 45 minutes or so that would make this meaningful?
For me personally, I'd like to maybe know how to approach somebody who invest in a potential idea. Let's say specifically in intellectual mental health, and someone who creates new software that's going to facilitate
Okay.
maybe like a person, no background in the MRI, just an observant person.
Okay, but I want to just sort of focus on the ideation and brainstorming, exactly, which is what is the focus today.
So basically, it's how to break down an idea to a potential.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Maybe common pitfalls.
Okay. And most of this is actually to break that down. We'll talk about, yeah.
So some strategies of developing creative brainstorming sessions or creative ideation workshops.
Okay.
How do you process going is kind of get a group together and brainstorm.
Okay. And hopefully we'll get a chance to actually do some of that after the talk. Because I solemnly believe in this particular field, it's much better to actually do than talk about it. So talking about it is actually kind of sad. So this is a talk I put together. Basically, this ideation, I think, is bad jargon for essentially problem solving and creative problem solving, because that's what it boils down to. And I just wanted to thank you for having me here. The plan is very basic. We're going to talk a little bit about why this matters in the first hour or so, and look at some of the strategies. And I'll actually step out of the presentation bit to talk a little bit more specifically, I think, in what you guys are saying. What are the pitfalls? Because frankly, a good brainstorming session can get you really far. A bad one will get you nowhere, and you'll just reinforce your original biases. And then we'll get to the workshop portion. I wanted to start with jargon, actually, because quite often when I'm approached by people, they start talking in these highfalutin words that sometimes I suspect they don't understand themselves. And quite often, especially when dealing with teams that are from different disciplines, talking different, using jargon really hurts discussion. So who thinks innovation is good? Raise your hand. Okay. Who thinks we need to innovate? Okay, raise your hand. That's great. Everybody, pretty much. Who wants to define innovation? Yes.
I would say a collaboration of creative solutions.
Okay, creative collaboration, potential solutions. Anyone else? Oh, you just raised your hands twice, saying it's really important and we should be doing it. New ways to think of things. Okay. New ways to do new things. Okay. New ways to do old things. Okay.
The long process from creativity.
Okay. Okay. So it's a process. Well, the reason I wanted to pick on you is if you actually start looking up innovation in various dictionaries, in various things, different dictionaries, different disciplines, different areas will tell you different things of what you're all here to do, and what you all solemnly believe and raise your hands for. The point is, quite often, and where this is leading, is that understanding or being on the same page as a team before you start thinking about ideas and what your problem is really important. Innovation is something we flip around every room, but this is not what I mean when I talk about the innovating process. Usually, when I personally am thinking about it, we talk about doing things differently, better, or in new ways to solve existing problems. Now, there are bits of that discussion that are important to different parts, and we may cover some of it in the next couple of minutes. But I also want to talk to you about these other words. So, collaboration. Who thinks collaboration is important? Okay, what do we mean by collaboration? Okay, working cohesively together. I can work cohesively with my plumber, and because of him or her, we have a great working bathroom relationship. But I'm not sure that I would qualify that as a collaboration, or it's a different kind of collaboration than perhaps I think we mean when we talk about innovating or designing or prototyping together. Translation, I just put that in just because that's my bailiwick. No matter who you talk to, and only in the health sciences, because the second you move out of health sciences, then you start talking about Latin and different languages and how do you translate one to the other. Nobody outside of health sciences primarily, or that's involved in health sciences, thinks of translation the way we generally do, which is this idea of mobilizing knowledge towards impact or towards commercialization or interventions. Creativity, surely we can come up with something for creativity. Okay, thinking outside the box. What does that mean?
Visualizing something that potentially a different way of somebody, let's say a solution to something.
Okay.
A system that applying an idea. So the straight line going to be a circle, a different pattern.
Okay.
Looking at this problem from a different perspective, tend to like just try to do things better, more efficient, less cost effective, better problem from
different perspective. Well, as you'll see when I put up some of the definitions that I found for things, actually none of those words will show up. And that's important. And here is kind of why I think some of this is important. Because we need to start with common ground about definitions. In innovation, when we get together as a team, as a group, we're going to look at a particular problem or a space or a domain. And our goal is not necessarily to come up with new ideas all the time, but we need better ideas. It's an important distinction because there's a directionality to what we're trying to do. Just because something is new or different doesn't mean it's better or more cost effective or can be implemented. And so when we do brainstorm, even though, as you'll hear, we'll talk about deferment of judgment and things like that, there is an intent. We are going in a particular way, and that's to make changes. So can innovation be taught? Yes. Okay, let's go on. Well, you're here in the classroom. Are you learning innovation? Or are you learning strategies and approaches and ways of thinking differently? Will you necessarily innovate after you come out of this classroom or this talk? These are open questions. Creativity, again, original ideas. Do you need to have an original idea to innovate?
I guess the basic structure. If you're looking to advance, I guess every idea comes from an original basic structure.
Does it need to be original? And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Sometimes innovation is not about turning the world upside down. It's a little tiny thing that ends up saving the system a lot of money or a person a lot of time. It's equally as valuable. Can it be taught? That was the sentence, right? Okay. So is creativity innovativity? the two aren't quite the same. You can be creative without being innovative, and you don't have to necessarily be creative to be innovative. You just have to recognize a pattern or a way of applying thinking in a different way. Is creativity needed for innovation? Yeah, because you kind of need to do something in a way that's better than the original. But it's not always about new and original and wonderful in a Monet or a painting. It's about solving a problem. And this has been done in engineering for a long, long time. Innovation is essentially, if you boil it down to, creative problem solving, in the sense not painting creative, but recognizing new and different iterations or patterns of thinking. I'm getting to a point. So how do you start? Because that's the big deal, isn't it? Because unless you kind of have a sense of starting to solve your problems, where you're going, it's really hard to move forward. You can reach block. And that's this word that people, mainly out of Silicon Valley, mainly out of Stanford, talk about ideation. The formation of concepts and ideas. And what I want to do is skip ahead a little bit to this part. What is different, I would argue, about this notion of ideation or this word than some of the things that we've been doing for thousands of years, I would argue, is that there's a focus more on group work or group decision making and group analysis of problems. And this is very different in the sense that for the past 30, 40, 50 years, quite often it's disciplinary problem solving that has been applied. People sitting with the same backgrounds and the same knowledge. And now all of a sudden we're learning, hey, wait a minute, we have different kinds of people around the table. They have different kinds of ideas. But that creates problems. So they call it radical collaboration, whatever it is. We speak different languages. We know different things. For us to start talking together, we need to have a way, a rule system to do that. Part of the rule system is that when we start brainstorming, we have to create spaces for that brainstorming that are relatively safe, so people can feel like they can throw ideas around, especially stupid ideas. The stupider, the worse, the more horrible the idea, you actually want it in a brainstorming session. If you shut those down right away, you shut down the potential of the group. In order to stop that, you have to make sure that within your group, you're able to create an environment where people can share anything and build on the ideas of other people. So that's the other key, is that it's not a possessive, it's not a competition. You're all trying to work together. The other thing is that in this stage of thinking, the opposite rules are true. That you may have been told, you know, I was told, quality is always better than quantity. You know, write a good essay or paper that has that great little nugget of result, high impact. Well, that's not the case here. Quantity is way, way more important than quality. You want as many things to come out when you're first starting to think about ideas. And you want the more radical, the more diverse, the better. And we'll get to that in a little bit. The thing that potentially makes some of these strategies work is because they do leverage multiple viewpoints. And that is the sort of, in fact, where we're being kicked here are by universities in Israel, for example, where they put people that are thinkers from across the board. I don't know if you know the story of the swallowable camera. where it's a pill cam. You swallow it, you get great imaging as it goes down. How did it get started? Well, a defense contractor in Israel was talking to his friend who was a medical doctor, and he was working on bombs guidance systems. And the doctor said, well, I need to better image the inside. The two of them, from different perspectives, came up with this idea of miniaturizing the camera into pill form. And different people, multiple perspectives, start leveraging ideas and work together towards solutions. This process of generating ideas, there are things you can do to make it easier for you and more effective. And that's just like riding a bike backwards. The key from Stanford Design School, whoever you talk to in this area, is that you need to try and open up the scope, the domain of possibilities as much as possible. That ultimately is one of the hardest things to possibly do, but at the same time, one of the most important things, because sometimes the most insane, the most odd kind of idea may end up to lead you to something fruitful. All right, so that's ideation. I could have talked about something else, but I'm not going to. What I want to do is link what we're going to be doing after this little talk to a greater sort of framework of thinking about innovation that we work on in the Translational Research Program. We can't teach you to innovate, but we can teach you to think about things in a process, in a framework, to be able to hopefully iteratively come up with ideas that are tested, verified, validated, and potentially can improve something that you're doing. So as we talk about, we may not have that lightning moment, but if we do take certain steps, we are more likely to have knowledge move in the right direction where we want it than if we just do it blindly. And so within this process, we look at things like discovery, and that's what you've been doing over the last several weeks, going out into the place with people, observing how things are being done. And I'm certain that in some ways you've noticed, hey, what's that all about? Why are they doing that? Is there a reason, or is this just cultural? Like they've been doing that forever, and now we're gonna. Why? Have you been doing that, the Medventions people? Have you noticed anything that's interesting? I see a lot of smiles and nods. But that, unfortunately, is not enough. It's a really important thing. And you have to understand how absolutely lucky you are to have this kind of access. Trying to innovate or trying to think about how to improve a situation without actually seeing or understanding it or observing is really, really hard. Being embedded and have the kind of access that you do is amazing. After you have that access or you're embedded in it, defining a problem. So one of sort of my personal aha moments working with students 2 years ago, when we had a team that started out, and they said, you know what, they realized based on their discovery that they wanted to focus on mental health. And in doing their discovery, they went around and they realized that at the U of T, there were really, really, really long waiting lines for mental health services. And so the first thing they did, they came back very happy that they found this domain, this problem, and they said, this is what we want to do. We have a need, it's access to mental health, and our problem is what we want to do is we want to reduce mental health problems on campus. I kind of looked at them and I said, well, that's great. I'm already, I can think of 2 ways, 3 ways maybe to do that. Reduce mental health problems on campus. Okay, so right now, when we screen students for acceptance, we are going to ask them if they have any mental health issues. And if the answer is even possibly yes in their family, we don't accept them. Within a year, we're going to reduce the number of mental health problems on campus. And they were kind of looking at me blankly like, you're making fun of us. And I was, because the other problem, the other idea I came up with right away is, from now on, we put all of our students in little rooms with straitjackets for 4 years. We will not have any visible mental health problems on campus for 4 years until they're released. Another idea, right off the bat, expel anyone that shows any potential of mental health problems. All three of those ideas would have easily solved their problem. Defining the problem is key, because if you have a bad definition, or if you take things, make assumptions about things, then no matter what ideas you have later on, you're on the road to potential disappointment. The next thing that's really important that I hope you guys have started doing is framing your problem in the context. So what are the regulations? What are the cultures? What are the ethics around the space you're working in? What do you need to know in this area in order to be able to navigate it? That in health science is particularly important because we are dealing with people. Most other design places, if you're doing an app that's going to give somebody a free reward, do you really want to consider, what effect it may or may not have 6 months down the road? If you're doing an app that is watching someone's medication and whether they're taking it and whether there's adherence, bad code, bad process can lead to lives lost. The stakes are much higher, so you need to know where you're working. And only then does it really make sense to start getting at the ideation process. The ideation process is, now that you understand your problem, you know the people, what are the possible ways you can tackle or approach this? And within this framework of thinking, as you'll see, these diamonds have these weird labels we've put on: convergent thinking, divergent thinking, all of these strategies. We can talk about abductive thinking. There are actually quite a lot of theories and literature in these areas. But all it means is that now that you're at a stage where you think you understand something, you've got to open it up. Diverge as much as possible, as crazy as possible. Because then you need to, once you have those ideas, start selecting the ones that are more appropriate for your context. Now, one of the things that's really important that you should also be thinking, and I hope that it's somewhat worked into your processes, is to verify. If you look at the FDA processes around design of devices, verification and validation are two different stages. Verify is that you got your ideas right, that you understood what the problem really was, that you understood your patient or user or population. So as you start getting ideas and validate and ideating, one of the other new things that we tend to do that really hasn't been done a lot before in this space is involve patients and involve the people who will be the end users, even though users is a bad way of describing people. The people that are going to be involved in these processes, having their perspective and sort of working with you on the ideas is really, really important, because it may give you insights that you did not think about before. Just going to move. So there are steps to doing this process, and whether you're designing something like a shopping cart or designing something to solve a problem within an operating room, There are ways that engineers for many years have approached this, that designers have approached this. You generate as many ideas as you can. As a group, as a team, you work on selecting what might be the most cost-effective or possible ideas. You work preferably with, and I come from a human-centered design background, user-centered design or people-centered design is where it's sort of evolved to. You go back to your users, to the people that are going to be involved in this, because that's one of the most important aspects of this process. If you do not get buy-in from the people that have to use whatever it is that you're developing, guess what? There are no shopping carts like the ones they designed for the ABC or CBC News, because the stores never wanted them. It was an exercise in, PR for them, sure, but there was no actual outcome at the end of the day. If you are trying to innovate to make things better, more cost efficient, new, you need to be sure that the people that are going to be using this or paying for it or somehow being treated by it are going to be your partners in helping you develop it, because you then have your alpha customer. You then have a lobby group to support it. You then have a voice outside of your team that actually can help you with the process. The showing is engagement with stakeholders. Verifying is testing. And now there's a whole new body of literature around implementation science in hospitals and clinics and healthcare settings on how to use both qualitative and quantitative research methodologies to actually get data and evidence about how much things save, how much they contribute to patient outcomes, so then you can convince policymakers or procurement people to buy your products and things. But all of those things are become ways for you to choose which option after you start ideating that you may wish to pursue. And you have to be flexible, and you have to have other ideas in your back pocket, because you never know when you stumble on to talking to somebody and you realize something new and you're going to have to reframe what you started on. I'm just looking at the time here, and we have about 8 minutes before we break. So I wanted to sort of look at this list that I shamelessly stole. We were talking earlier, great designers or poor designers borrow, great designers steal, make it your own. So I stole this, but I'm giving credit at the bottom from a website. The fact of the matter is, there are tons and tons of strategies for ideating, for brainstorming. Some will work for your group, some will not. Some will be great for one particular exercise and bad for another. My suggestion, quite honestly, is when you are working in a team, cut out time for brainstorming and ideating. Make sure you reserve a spot. On this day, for these 3 hours, we will be doing this, and we are going to try this. And if you try it, it may or may not work. If you reflect as a team what was good and what was bad, then you will get better at it. If you keep trying to ride that backwards bicycle, then eventually you will find something that works for you. So it could be, for example, this thing that some people talk about, brainwriting. Instead of brainstorming, which IDEO did not develop, there's literature going back to 1950, 1954 is about the brainstorming rules. You can look it up. And they're almost virtually identical to IDEO's brilliant brainstorming rules. But brainwriting is the new thing that some teams do. Why brainwriting? Because brainstorming apparently is good for people that are loud and vocal and obnoxious, but then those people that are timid and quiet and sort of sit in the background never share their ideas. So now if you put your idea on a piece of paper and hand it around, you have another way to get ideas from the people that generally don't participate in brainstorming. It really, because you're dealing with people in your group, you have to fit the exercise to the team members that are comfortable and how you do these exercises. So, and I see this. We had a brainstorming exercise in class about gliolin and the labeling of this compound for glioblastomas, because the FDA recently approved this, but actually hadn't approved this for, I think, 13 or 14 years, even though it was being used in Europe. And one of the people in one of the groups said right away, well, I don't think this is a drug. And everyone, all of the clinicians, all of the other experts in the room kept arguing for half an hour around what the FDA should do and how it helps the surgeon. But it wasn't a drug. It couldn't be classified as a drug. And they had the answer, but they never listened to one of their team members. So it's very important when you run these kinds of exercises to try and get ideas out that all team members are listened to and that you have the one conversation and you build on their ideas. So other strategies, mind mapping, there's tons of software out there. Frankly, my personal preference is sitting in a room with a smaller group of people and just, throwing ideas out, putting paper on a table and writing what comes to mind, having questions that you prepare in advance about your problem and seeing what kind of things people come up with. And as a group, sort of, you can role play, you can have personas, so develop a user or a use case. All of these strategies may work on one area, not another. And they're out there on the internet, they're free to use, but you need to work together as a team. Ideation really actually works if you have a good, strong, cohesive team. And that's how, because it's not generating the ideas actually that's the problem, it's picking the good ideas from the bad. And that only comes when you have a good, cohesive team and you're open to listening to others. So we're just going to move on. That's as much as I want to say for this. The workshop, as I understand it, the two teams have problem sets already. So I had prepared a problem set for you to brainstorm over. We can do mine, but I'm equally as happy to do yours. No. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. What I was going to do is get you to think about the hospital bed. People sleep on beds all the time. And apparently, there's some of these in hospitals. But you know what? Beds actually make healing harder. The more you stay in your bed, the less you heal. And you know what? You develop comorbidities like pressure sores, ulcers. And when it comes to nurses and healthcare workers, most of those beds make it next to impossible to bathe or move people. And if they strain themselves or fall, an average fall of a hospital care worker is about $72,000 to the system. A bed store starts at $4,000 if it's advertised early enough, if it's analyzed early enough, caught early enough. Bed stores can go over $100,000 in cost to the system if they are not treated properly or in time. There are wait times because if you don't have beds, you can't admit people. Well, that's really silly in a sense. And do you know how much an average hospital bed costs? $2,000. Anyone else? $60,000? There are different kinds of models. The basic model started at about $4,000. There are specialized ones that go up $30,000+. But that's nothing compared to one fall or one lawsuit or one accidental death. So I was going to get you guys to brainstorm around hospital beds. However, it can be anything else. So that's my little talk. Don't underestimate the value of soft skills. Thank you.
I'd just like to, before we switch off the live webinar, do you guys have any questions? When you're talking about the brainstorming sessions, is that with the idea that, let's say you have a whole list of problems that you want to tackle, is it better to everyone sort of just start throwing out random ideas, or sit down and go, we're going to tackle, like this example, this specific problem, let's brainstorm on that issue?
It depends what your end goal is. If your end goal is to tackle a specific issue, try and keep focused. So put one thing at a time to one group. But you can work collaboratively and have different groups or have different leaders tackle a different issue at a time. Eventually, you'll have to narrow down. You can't work on multiple things. It's one of the things that a lot of people tend to try and want to do is jump to a solution right away that's all-encompassing and is going to be the magic bullet. And rarely does that ever become reality. You're better off many times to clearly have a defined problem and work towards solving one little piece of it than trying to tackle a huge problem all at once. Break it off into bite-sized bits. But it also depends what stage you're at in the project cycle, right? If you're at a very early stage, then you want to have blue sky, as much wild ideas as possible, because that will help you open up the scope of potential. If you're nearing where you have a really high fidelity prototype and you've noticed one little problem with it, then you're probably going to want to focus on trying to solve that one issue. That's part of the hard part, is that there is no one answer. People want, give me a list with like a choose your own adventure and then I'll innovate. You know, A, B, C, but a lot of it is much craft and experience and just flexibility.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Do you recommend doing patent searching, for example, before doing the brainstorming sessions or after, or in the meantime, like between? It could bias you towards one direction of thinking, but it's also useful to know what currently exists and what.
See, that's interesting. It's an interesting problem, because I would say that the patent searcher are what I would call as part of framing the problem. If you need to know where there are open spaces, if you're going to brainstorm the magical idea, but it's been patented up the wazoo, then what is the point of your brainstorming? You have to have some sense of the market analysis and the state of what's going on and the state of the art. So being familiar with what other people are doing is really key. But also remember, this is iterative. So even when you come up with an idea, you should go back and do the search again, because now you'll have a focused idea of where to search the patents in a specific area. And you could probably delve much deeper into that area.
We've all heard the term artificial intelligence being thrown around. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking to myself, how do you see AI, or do you see AI being involved in brainstorming ideation?
That's the next step. It's the next logical step. Actually, I see it, and I've been thinking a lot about it. What that is being called is called generative design. And quite frankly, I do believe that is the next phase of all of this stuff. So as human beings, we are going to be brainstorming the parameters that fit into the context of our experience based on our observations and readings of other human beings. But the machines are then going to take those parameters and brainstorm 10,000 solutions, 10,000 variations on solving that problem. At that point, then the problem becomes which one might work. And at this stage, for maybe in the next 10, 15, 20 years, machines are still not able to anticipate fully human responses. So even though they can generate 1,000 or 10,000 solutions, it will then still take you as designers, thinkers, engineers to pick out of those potential solutions the ones that might be culturally appropriate, that might be aesthetically pleasing, that then get put back into the system and tested to see which will work. So it will change. That's what people are calling generative design. It will change the way we problem solve, and it's already changing the way we problem solve. Even in pharma, like being able to generate computer models of what chemicals might affect what, and then test them on, through microfluidic chips that have organs on them at possible interactions, to then narrow down your potential targets to 3 or 4 instead of 10,000. It's still going to have intervention by human beings, and it's only going to be as good as the input that we put into the beginning part. But AI is going to revolutionize how we do these things. It's already starting.
More questions?
You said, thank you very much, Dr. Amazing answer. I feel very privileged to make so far. But when it comes to any innovator, whether it's healthcare or any other sector, you mentioned that some ideas sound very basic and that brainstorming requires simple ideas or topics that I've mentioned. Should there be a limit to what kind of background a person is, or like screening methods for a future innovator? Or is it really just about getting those synapses kind of connected and imagine potential solutions? Because when I say developing 10,000 solutions or more really requires that kind of brainstorming, I would call it. So would you recommend that a future innovator is screening for potential skills or thinking methodology before they get into it?
See, that's the thing, is that the more different kinds of minds that are put around the table, the more variety of ideas that you potentially will have. So screening is the antithesis in some ways for trying to open up the scope of ideas. And ideas can come from all over. Now, we as humans can't come up with 10,000 viable ideas. Machines are much better at that than we are. But we can then, machines can't yet anticipate human behavior 100%. So it still takes us to prototype, test, and choose amongst ideas. And I don't think that it's a particular, when it comes to innovation, it's hard to predict who will come up with what. Sometimes it's a lightning strike, sometimes it's an aha moment when you're standing watching someone do something. At Harvard, I was talking to somebody that plastic surgeon, and so generally up until a few years back, this is a few years old now, you had to be sort of eyeballing how you're going to do a person's side of their face. And she thought, why not just put up a data projector with a grid up on top of them and project a grid onto someone's face? A very simple, we've had overhead projectors for how many, dozens of years. Nobody thought of putting up a projector up top to put a grid on someone's face so that you could better balance plastic surgery. So I think innovation is not something that can be taught, but I think that you can make the space for innovation. You can make the relationships and the people and opportunities for innovation, like what's happening, I think, here, very much to your credit, where you're bringing people together and giving them a chance to think about problems and immerse themselves in spaces. Those opportunities are absolutely invaluable for ideas. And when it comes to ideas, there was a management guru in '96 or something that wrote a paper that Google then picked up and has been sort of the rule of thumb. For any one Google successful product, there are usually 3,000 failed ideas. So think about that. If you want to innovate really effectively, you had better try things 3,000 times so that maybe one of them will be successful. So if you're only making 3 innovations out of your unit or whatever, it's going to take a lot longer for innovation to happen. But if you create opportunities and spaces to have more ideas and move them forward, you're more likely to stumble onto something amazing.
May I go ahead now?
Yeah, sure.
The bicycle exercise, if you think of how can no exercise succeed to kind of activate future potential for brainstorming? You take a look at and give them the bicycle, like half an hour, or how do you see that
I don't know. I mean, I bet you there's somebody out there doing those sorts of experiments right now, but I don't know how that would work. I know that there have been some recent studies that have questioned the earlier studies around the neuroplasticity earlier studies. So I don't know. I think it's still fairly open.
Okay, so this concludes our lecture component for the session. Let's take a 15-minute break and come back to start the workshop.